Hey folks, thanks very much for joining our Monday Mindshare this week. It's been an awesome few weeks and it's just been a lot going on both at SFuels and in the world of racing with the Tour de France and getting an ultra done by yours truly and my son. And I wanted to talk today about the fusion of several things that have come together that's really brought up a topic which is going to be a really fun one. And it's partly about multi-day racing and multi-night actually racing and some of the effects of that, specifically hallucinations. But I do want to tie this back to some more functional, practical relevance of multi-day training, which of course we're all exposed to. But this has come about by really, like I say, this collision of a question from one of our ultra athletes after a Monday Mindshare we did the other week on caffeine, plus the UTMB race that we just got done in Verbier, and also watching over the past few weeks the Tour de France and a new book from a good friend of ours based in Chamonix. We'll talk about Doug later and the book and some of the quotes in there as it relates to UTMB, what happens during these multi-night races. And as I said, I'll use this as a lead-in, but we'll get back to talking about this question from our ultra friend and ultimately get back to what does this mean for back-to-back heavy training days and weeks. So we'll get into that soon. But first, let's talk about this multi-day night racing and hallucinations, which is really an interesting topic. And actually, this particular athlete that of ours, he's actually a doctor, obviously well-trained, understands clearly a lot about physiology, but this question about hallucinations, and this is not, it's actually a fairly well documented. I'll put some links from some of the Stanford University, just some simple documents online to take a read of. It's really quite fascinating, but it is a common side effect of sleep deprivation. That is hallucinations. And, you know, you'll see this in both long distance ocean swimmers, ultra marathon runners. I've never experienced it in a triathlon, but I'm sure the longer multi-day triathlons, I'm sure they absolutely experience it. It's experienced in the race across America, of course, the bike race. And, you know, at least 80%, it's said by some of these folks and researchers at Stanford, 80% of people will hallucinate if severely sleep deprived. And, you know, what's interesting is that when we talk about sleep deprivation, we talk just about, you know, the average, if you will, sleep needed to avoid the adverse effects of sleep deprivation. It's said to be at 8 hours and 10 minutes. Now, in ultra racing, of course, this can be zero sleep over 24, 48 hours, even more in some cases. Not something I'm recommending, but it absolutely happens in some of this ultra racing that goes on. Now, some of the research and some of the books that are published by neurologists and the like talk about differentiating between, if you will, dreams and hallucinations. And they talk about hallucinations being this, you know, it's a misperception of objects that are already there. But in hallucinations, it's actually misperceptions that are of nothing. They're conjured up out of total thin air. And I do want to give you a few cases of my own experience. Twice now, I've had hallucinations happen to me, and I'm sure a number of ultra runners of the SFuels athletes around the world have experienced similar. But maybe for those who haven't, you might find this quite maybe entertaining. And it is entertaining to me looking back, but at the time, it certainly wasn't. And there's a couple of photos here that are from a 6-day race in Vietnam back in 2007 that I ran in. And it's put on by a group called Racing the Planet. They have a number of, I think 4 races a year now, where it's a 250-kilometer race. And for this particular year in the northern Vietnam, right on the border with China, it was run through the mountains there. First day was 110 kilometers. And I do recall the following morning after finishing that stage that there were folks that were talking to us about what was happening in the night as we were running one particular portion of it, which actually that particular portion was on a road with two straight lines down both sides of the road. And you would assume that you just run down the road. And I was told the following morning that I was actually bouncing from one white line diagonally across the road to the other white line, and I was doing that for kilometers. And it wasn't long after that that we hit the, I think it was 70, 80 kilometer aid station, and I had some rest there and finish off the stage, apparently running straight. The second time this happened to me was in Ultra Trail Mont Blanc in 2016. We had covered, so what is that? About 70%, 125 kilometers, which, and probably about, 70%, 7,000 meters, 21,000 feet of climbing. And we came into this village called Champec Lac, and my family was there to help me, and a lot of athletes were getting help from their support crews there, because that particular night of the race day, which was the second night, we had come off the valley floor, and you have to traverse upwards through a trail in the forest. And way up higher in the mountain, there was, at snow level, there was a cracking thunderstorm, and it was raining. And I recall coming through this forest, and in the trees, you can see in this image that I've provided here, they have these carvings into the trees. And I thought what I was seeing was live animals active, like carved into the trees. And this was just hallucinating again. And this kind of came back to me because this last week when we were in Chamonix again, after the Verbier ultra race that we did, which was a much shorter race, it was like 40 something kilometers, but 3,000 meters of climbing. But we caught up with a great friend of ours who's a journalist, Doug Mayer, out of the US, but now based in Chamonix. He was one of the editors and journalists for the Trail Running magazine, ultra runner himself, and he now leads a company in Chamonix called Run the Alps. If you want to run any of the awesome trails through the Italian, French, Swiss trails and Alps, that's your company, Run the Alps. Check it out online. Amazing experiences they have. But he released his second book called The Race That Changed Running, the inside story of UTMB. And the reason I bring this up for is I'm just going to read a section of this because this is what brought it all back up, in addition to the question we got from our athlete. And it's on the 64th page, and it just talks about this section that I just talked about of Champec Lac, this aid station at 125 kilometers. It says many UTMB dreams end here. In this huge tent where the runners come in. As runners leave, UTMB officials might stop them for a gear check, asking them to see a rain shell or 2 required headlamps, since for many participants, the next section brings a second sleepless night. That second night blank. It's likely to be much harder than the first, as the frontal cortex, miswired from lack of sleep and fuel, generates fantastical thoughts and quirky hallucinations. And it says, next comes a widely vilified section of the course, a rocky, endless feeling, charmless climb on rock-strewn farm tracks. Here it's hard not to think of Winston Churchill's advice, if you're going through hell, keep going. It's an awesome book. You got to read it. It's really the history of UTMB, the experience of UTMB. It's got a number of pros that Doug has interviewed to tell the story, and then the whole creation of the UTMB race. So check it out. It's a really good read. But back to the story, this question that our doctor, our athlete has asked. And I think you really need, and the question was really around, should I take caffeine in this high dose format for fat oxidation in multi-night and day races? And I'll answer the question now, and then we'll finally get back to this whole construct of back-to-back heavy training, heavy racing. I think in answering the question about the use of caffeine in these multi-night races, you really need firstly to break out multi-day night races from single day or 24-hour type races. And probably maybe the easier way, high level generally, and this is obviously a very generalization, but maybe you're talking about 100-kilometer races, which typically within 24 hours, 100-mile races, which can be multi-day, multi-night. And again, it's all dependent on the performance of an athlete. But multi-night races, you certainly need to be more careful with the timing and use of caffeine. And I'll talk more on this below. But, my guidance to this athlete was that, really when we're thinking about caffeine use in ultra running, there is the fat oxidation side and there's the cognitive side. And we particularly want to think about the use of when we start using caffeine. I've had 40-kilometer races that start at 11 p.m. at night. I've had 100-kilometer races that start 8 a.m. in the morning. And UTMB, for example, it starts at 6 p.m. on a Friday night, and it goes through, obviously, Saturday, and for some it finishes there. And for some, it goes through to Sunday. And because of all of that, when you start the use and the dosage of caffeine will be very different. But generally speaking, you certainly want to be using it in the spirit of boosting both cognitive function and, frankly, fat oxidation as you come into the night. All of this dosage that we're talking about in terms of thinking about managing through the night, a lot of this is to do with more cognitive function in supporting, awareness and confidence and mood as you run through the night. And I mean through the whole night. And for this functionality with caffeine, as I've said before, 0.5 milligram per kilogram of body weight is a dosage guideline that we give, and it's sufficient. And generally with caffeine, of course, every 6 hours, you need to redose as you get into the half-life of caffeine in that period. So for 24-hour racing, I would not expect much of a dampening effect on mental alertness by taking that 0.5 milligrams, per kilogram of body weight and taking that every 6 hours through the race. However, if you were to think about applying caffeine to maximize fat oxidation, we know that the dosage is a much higher dose. It's more, like we've said in the recent shows, 2.5 to 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. That's what's required to really upregulate. And we've talked about 20, 26% in some of these studies are showing with that kind of dosage. And this is, certainly applicable for full and half Ironman and marathons, etc. Even 40, 50-kilometer races, I wouldn't have a problem with that. Even 50 milers, it wouldn't be a problem with that. This is mostly races that are in the 9 to 15 hour period, no trouble with that. Again, you would want to be thinking about taking that every 6 hours in order to get the continued effect through the period of the race. Now, if you applied this to greater than a 12-hour, meaning like an ultra race, you may want to certainly test this, and it's hard to do, but in a race, but really to understand how your body responds to this. But my own personal thinking on this would be that you could apply that 2.5 to 3 milligram per kilogram body weight for races of one night. However, when you start thinking about longer ones, longer races, I probably would not apply this method. I would probably rather apply using the 0.5 milligrams per kilogram for each 6 hours. I would do that through the race. And if you're getting into a double night race, I would certainly rest it is absolutely incredible what 60 to 90 minutes of, and it will be quality sleep just by the sheer exhaustion. But it's incredible what that does mentally, as much as it sure has application with respect to physically resting, but mentally what that does for you in terms of a reset. And after that, being able to restart the race, and continuing the race thereafter that 60 to 90 minute rest, I would then go back into the 0.5 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine. And I would continue doing that for each 6 hours until the completion of the race. And this is certainly my experience at UTMB, that forest experience and hallucination. I did have 90 minutes of rest. I had some food. I had some warm reclothing, put on re-race gear, and got back out on the trail and felt much better about it, and certainly was able to then complete the following 50 kilometers. Now, for all of us, it's all about testing. We really need to understand how that applies to us in our own physiology when we're conducting these multi-day, multi-night ultras. Now, let's go back, though, to just then the more practical situation or experience of multi-day heavy load training weeks. And when you've got day in, day out of 2-3 sessions a week, it's probably less about hallucinations, but certainly we can see sleep deprivation largely from, poor sleep. And we can also see, obviously, physical and immune system deprivation, or if you will, issues associated with this kind of heavy load training. Now, I would suggest 2 things to go back and listen, and I'll put them in I'll put the images here on the screen so you can see which Monday Mindshare videos I'm talking about, and I'll put the links down below. Go back and listen to boosting glycogen through the use of glutamine prior to race day. And this is all about, rapid recovery, and it's done through glutamine being a way to increase and accelerate the resynthesis of glycogen in the muscle tissue. That's one aspect about rapid recovery for these multi-heavy day training blocks. From a mental perspective, go back and listen to the video we did on chamomile, and it was actually a versus alcohol, but it is more given in the spirit of quality sleep and improving heart rate variability. And this is more about sympathetic and parasympathetic balance as we go from one training day and multiple sessions to the next day. How do we ensure the sleep is highest quality? And you'll see in that particular video, we show some cases, some studies of the use of chamomile to facilitate that. Other nutrients there, of course, is obviously your magnesium, your tryptophan, and then also your threonine. These things you can obviously easily get as a supplement, and we're working on some things around this. But my general guidance would be for those large building blocks and thinking about rapid recovery. I think with on the days where it's heavy loads, 2-3 sessions a day, you should be thinking 10 grams of glutamine. That would be like 2 serves of Revival, or basically have 1 serve after each of your training sessions. And then on your lighter days in those heavy block weeks, think about 5 grams of glutamine per day. This is really some guidance to think about accelerated recovery and ensuring that you can bounce back for the subsequent day on these heavy back-to-back weeks of training loads. I hope you found that both entertaining, interesting, and also helpful as you go through the season and thinking about loading up your larger weeks and really being able to boost back, both with respect to your physical recovery and secondly, sympathetic, parasympathetic, nervous balance, and quality sleep. All the best this week in racing and training wherever you are around the world. Thanks very much for joining our Monday Mindshare. And as usual, go longer, be well. Thanks again. Bye.